Hi folks, just wanted to give you sort of an activity to follow up from lecture B5 with a couple of concrete examples of some of the quantitative exercises that you might be expected to do at this sort of point in the course. And so most of these are going to be focusing on demand functions and related concerns. So let's just kind of get warmed up here with a few PED or price elasticity of demand concepts here. So what I'm basically going to do is run through a couple of examples and my justifications for why you would expect certain elasticities, and then I'll hand it back to you in the Canvas exercise, and you will go through and answer a few of questions on the Canvas where you get to sort of rank things in terms of their elasticity as well, and then we'll come back and move on after that. So, for when we're thinking about PED, one of the things we might ask about is what do we think the elasticity or what the price elasticity of demand is going to be in a scenario where you have many substitute goods. So take a second to think about that. If you have many substitute goods, what we mean by that, what economists mean by that, is that there are alternatives available that are just as good for you, other goods that are other products, I should say, that are equally fine versus the product that we're focusing on. Now, if that were the case, like let's say you were at a grocery store and looking for cereals, and you were looking for some type of Raisin Bran, and there's a bunch of different Raisin Brans of all different brands, but to you they're all equivalent. In that particular case, you might imagine you would be driven entirely by price, and you would just buy the one that's cheaper. Well, that would sort of suggest that you would respond very much to the change in price of another one. So if brand A is cheaper one week and brand B is cheaper the other week, and you always follow the cheaper brand, then in that case we would say that the quantity demanded of any particular brand is going to be very elastic to its price. So if I am, somebody who's managing brand A, and I lower the price, then I would expect many more customers to buy my brand because I suddenly am cheaper than all of the other brands of Raisin Bran in the market. So when there's many substitute goods are available, we say that it is very elastic. Now, a little more exotic example, you often hear about luxury goods are put into this category. Now, what do we mean by luxury goods having alternatives? We don't mean that there's other alternative luxury goods, but we mean that there are other goods that may not be a luxury good but serve exactly the same function. So you may not be able to afford a particular type of high performance automobile, but but you do need an automobile, so you buy one that is at a price point that is more comfortable for you. But later on, you hear that there's going to be some sort of sales or deals on, and that would allow you to buy an automobile that maybe gives you, maybe is more high performance or has some other features that you like. That is a perfect alternative for the vehicle you want now. But the only thing that is causing you to buy the vehicle now is that buy the luxury vehicle now is that its price went down. So anything that you can imagine where you have an alternative you could go to, but if the price of the other one went down, you would do it. That is an elastic good. That is something that is very sensitive to changes in price. All right, so let's move on. Now, imagine if we had another good that its price was very small relative to your income. So again, think about this. It's actually kind of hard to think about a lot of examples of these nowadays, but these are things that you happen to not even think about because the price is so small. So if you happen to make, I don't know, I'll just pick a round number, $100,000 a year, and you have a significant amount of that as disposable income because you're relatively frugal, then if you happen to every once in a while run into something which it costs pennies to buy, you're not really going to even think about whether it breaks your budget for that month or anything like that. It's so small that you are pretty sure it's not going to make any difference to you whatsoever. So if someone increases the price from 2 pennies to 4 pennies, that's a huge increase in price, right? They just doubled the price. But still, 4 pennies is so cheap that if you were willing to buy it at 2 pennies, you'll also be willing to buy it at 4 pennies. So, and similarly, if somebody were to cut the price from 4 pennies to 2 pennies, you also are going to be just as equally to buy it. So here, I'm not saying that you have to buy the good, but I'm saying that it is just so cheap that you just don't really care. So, maybe one example, depending on where you are in your career, like maybe you want to rent a movie some night, and that movie is $4, or maybe it's $2. Then you have to ask yourself that, like, if you made a significant if you had a significant income to the point where if the movie price changed from $2 to $4, that it wouldn't really affect whether you were willing to watch that movie, then you're fitting into this category where it is an inelastic good because you're not even paying attention to the price, because the prices are probably always going to sit into a region where it's not going to make any difference to you whatsoever in either of those cases. So that's another case where we would call it'd be inelastic. And so, and just as a reminder, inelastic means the absolute value of this funny quantity PED is less than 1. And all that less than 1 means is that the percent change in quantity will be less than the percent change in price that we're interested in. So a 10% increase in price will mean less than 10% change in quantity. All right, so now good is a necessity. So here's a case where even if prices are high, you might not change your mind even if the prices change either upwards or downwards. So if you absolutely need the good, you're not even thinking about price. So this is a different reason you don't think about price. But regardless of the reason is, if you're not thinking about price, we always say it's what? It's inelastic. So if you're not considering price, then that means price is not going to make any difference on quantity. And so if price doesn't make a difference on quantity, then it's inelastic. And what we mean by that is the PED is less than 1. The absolute value of the PED is less than 1. What about habit forming? This is like an accidental necessity. So if you have something that may not be cheap, but is something that you just can't help but live without. If it's something that over time, once upon a time it was an option, but now that you've gotten used to it, you just keep wanting to buy it. So this could be an example. Let's think of something a little more benign than I think most examples of people come in mind. Let's say you've got a series. Like, I'm going back to the movie rental example, but now I'm thinking about TV. So let's say you've got a television series that you might want to stream, and you're interested in watching the first episode. And that first episode, it might at that point, that first episode might be inelastic because it's so cheap that you don't really care about the price, and so you watch that first episode just because you're interested in it, and it's cheap enough that you don't really care if it's $2 or $4. Now, once you watch that, you might now be so excited about that show that you're going to watch the second episode, and then the third and the fourth, and you end up binge watching the whole thing, and you might purchase every single episode. Now, those second, third, fourth, and fifth purchases, you're purchasing them not because you don't care about the price. I mean, in the end, you might look back at it and think, wow, I just spent $50 on a TV show. But at that point, your habit is driving it. And so you're not even paying attention to the price because it's turned into a necessity. So it's inelastic in that case, inelastic. All right, now, good is trendy or in fashion. So what do we mean by trendy or in fashion? This is like, it's extremely popular right now, and there are not a lot of alternatives. So for whatever reason, I mean, so you can think about like clothing trends. There are always alternatives you can wear as clothing, but when it becomes a trend, then that means that despite all of the alternatives, you always end up wearing that particular thing. So, a particular color might be in right now. Well, so that means that you're going to want a lot of that color because you want to keep up with the trend. Even though there are other colors you could buy as an alternative, you end up always going for that color. So when things become trendy or in fashion or popular in that sort of point of view, so popular that they cannot be substituted by other alternatives out, then you stop paying attention to the price. And so it becomes inelastic again. So another inelastic example. If it wasn't trendy, if you could wear anything, or was wear just a shirt, or just a phone or something like that, then in those cases, then you're going to watch price. You're going to say, I need a shirt. I don't care what the shirt is, so I'm going to buy the cheapest shirt I can find that fits. But if it is a particular type of shirt that you're looking for, or hat or whatever, then in that case you care a little less about price. And so trendy or in fashion, that typically means inelastic. All right, so let's flip a little bit and then make sure we've got this term elastic down. So we also talked about inferior goods, where an inferior good is a good where the demand actually goes down even after the income goes up. So income is going up and demand is going down. So the so-called income elasticity of demand is negative for an inferior good. Now, in price elasticity of demand, we almost never refer to the sign of price elasticity of demand because of the so-called law of demand. The law of demand suggests that that demand curve is always negatively sloping, except for these weird things like Giffen goods. So like in a Giffen good, like we talked about a few lectures ago, the Giffen good is this weird case where the demand actually goes upwards. But almost all goods follow the so-called law of demand, which means that price and quantity have a negative relationship. If you increase price, you typically decrease quantity. If you decrease price, you typically increase quantity. And because of that, the price elasticity of demand, PED, technically it's almost always negative, but because it's almost always negative, people just refer to it as a positive because there's no kind of information in saying it's negative because it's always negative, and so people just refer to its magnitude. That's why we talk about the absolute value of the PED. Now, in the case of income elasticity, there's tons of goods that are normal goods, and there's tons of goods that are inferior goods. So when we talk about income elasticity of demand, which some people use a Y to denote, in the income elasticity of demand, we actually do report the sign. So the definition of an inferior good is a good for which the income elasticity of demand is negative, and the definition of a normal good is a good for which the income elasticity of demand is positive. So let's review what we mean by elasticity of demand. That's the change in demand relative to the current quantity demanded, divided by the change in whatever our focal quantity is, divided by the current value of that. So for price elasticity of demand, if I flip back, so for price elasticity of demand, this is kind of delta Q over Q. That's the change in quantity over delta P over P, which is the change in price, the relative change in quantity over the relative change in price. So in income elasticity, I've got the relative change in quantity, so it's still delta Q over Q, but then that's divided by the relative change in income. So for a 10% change in income, do I get a 10% change in demand? If I do, then that's unitary. If I get less than that, then we call that inelastic because we didn't change that much. If I get more than that, then we call it elastic because I did get that change. But then for income elasticity, we also do care about the sign. So we can have it be negative and inelastic as well as positive and inelastic. All right, so I want to then flip to a running example for the next thing, but before we get that, let's go back to Canvas and answer a couple of questions and make sure you're feeling good about this elasticity concept.